Got a bunch of great mailbag questions rolling in. Submit yours in the YouTube comments below or hit me up on Twitter or become a Locked On Ducks insider. That works as well. Link is in the description below. This one came in from ZelfFS, whatever that means. It works. What's your thoughts on our defense? I listened to this other guy that made a good point. People not named me are not allowed to give good points on the Ducks. Obviously, it's me or it's nobody. That's heavy sarcasm, just so we're clear. In every big game, Washington times 2, Ohio State times 2, Penn State, Georgia, first Oregon State game, etc., our defense has given up tons of total yards and points. Also, seems like our rush defense hasn't been all that good. Do we need to find someone else for our defensive coordinator? Tosh is good, but is he elite? So I thought of this as, does Oregon just need better players? Is that all that it is? Because it's hard to argue with every point you made here. You didn't even bring up Boise State, who was one of the best teams that Oregon played this year. 34 points. Now, that wasn't necessarily all on the defense, but a good chunk of it was. I mean, the defense didn't fumble to give Boise State the ball inside their Oregon 20, 25-yard line, but they gave up a touchdown instead of being able to hold to a field goal. But that's kind of nitpicking. On the whole, 34 points, not as many as you would like to see. So I don't think that this is as simple as Oregon just needs to get better talent. Because right now, there is plenty of frustration amongst Oregon fans about the secondary, and they got to be better, and they got to be taller, and all these sorts of things. And certainly, Oregon's secondary is undersized compared to some of the players that they've recruited and the way that it might look one day. Another subject we'll touch on later on today's show. But I don't look at Oregon's defense at any position group and say that talent is the biggest thing that they were missing, that's all they need. If they just had better players, once the recruits really get fully incorporated from these 24 and 25 recruiting classes, then Oregon's defense will take off. Let's make something very clear. Oregon had a great defense this year. Can it improve? Obviously. Because I look at Ohio State's defense, I look at Notre Dame's defense, and I think they're better than what Oregon has. Is there a talent difference? At some spots, yes. Notre Dame and Ohio State has significantly higher impact safeties than Oregon. 100%. Oregon has 2 first-round picks and another second, third, maybe fourth-round pick along the defensive line in this locker room. Well, or I guess they had those guys. Mateo, Birch, Harmon. Harmon's going to be a first-round pick. Mateo might be a top 10 pick come the 2026 NFL draft. And Birch is going to get taken by somebody because he's a physical freak. That is on par with what Ohio State and Notre Dame have put on the defensive line this year, who both have great defensive lines. But Oregon's defensive line has been a menace. And if your reaction is to just look at the Ohio State game and say, well, they didn't generate enough pressure on Will Howard, that's true. Will Howard also wasn't holding the ball very long because schematically, Oregon was outflanked in that game. They were outcoached, and that neutralized some of their most talented guys. The way that Ohio State got rid of the ball, when they called this play, when they called that play, because Ohio State's defensive line, we all agree that that's good, right? I watched them have a minimal impact on a certain game played at Autzen Stadium on October 12th. 0 sacks. 0 sacks in that game. Or were they not any good? Did they not have the talent? No. Some days, you just go against a great unit that's playing well, and the scheme matters a lot more than a lot of people realize. So I look at Oregon's defense and say there are areas where they can improve, where they can be better, but the talent is not the biggest thing holding Oregon's defense back. So in these big games, the biggest thing that I have seen from Oregon's defense is that the coaching staff has not put the guys in the right situations to succeed. Now, that doesn't mean it's always their fault. This is a blended problem. I mean, when Ashton Genty broke that one-play touchdown run after the Patrick Herbert fumble, it felt like Oregon was actually starting to build momentum and was driving down to have a 2-possession lead. All of a sudden, Herbert fumbles and then a one-play touchdown, and Boise State has tied the game. Yeah, there were bad run fits there. Do you blame that on the players, or do you blame that on the coaches? I mean, there's one school of thought, you're either coaching it or allowing it to happen. There's the other school of thought, you can only prepare guys to do so much. And based on what we saw from Oregon's secondary in terms of tackling for the rest of the season. I thought Nico Reed was really good. I thought Brandon Johnson was solid. I thought everybody else just okay at times in the open field, or taking down running backs at times like Ashton Genty. So that's a combination of those two. Like, everyone has to be better collectively. I don't think it's all on Tosh, and I don't think it's all on just a couple of players on the defensive side of the ball. Everyone's got to be better. But to say that the coaching staff has no ability to improve and therefore changes should be made, yeah, I don't share that particular belief. You know, the fire this coach or fire that coach or coordinator, who else, or I'm not in that camp, because this is a coaching staff that in several ways you can point to their 3 seasons and say they got better from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3. I felt like they really upped the talent level from year 1 to year 2. Did so in year 2 to year 3, but then the scheme and approach and the details got a lot better because the numbers got a lot better. That's what I'm going off. Is you're allowing less than 20 points a game, you're doing something right. But with the way Oregon recruits, yeah, the ceiling is higher. The ceiling is what you see Ohio State doing this year. That's the best Oregon can become on either side of the ball, which is to say they're capable, if everything goes according to plan, of building a roster that's the best, or a team that is the best in all of college football. They had one of the best this year. They just happened to have a really bad day. So that's the first part. The second part of this is, in big games, when you are going against the best teams in college football, you are not always going to perform the way you do over the course of the season. That applies to literally anybody. Ohio State's defense was great. They gave up 32 points to Oregon too. Why did that happen? Because Oregon had a great game plan, a bunch of good players, and they executed really well. That's how high-level college football matchups can play out. And I know that Tosh just had a really bad day against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. It happens even with great coaches or great coordinators. I just watched earlier tonight Kevin O'Connell, who I think is a great coach. I just watched him get punked by Sean McVay. Absolutely clown, taken behind the woodshed and beaten with a 2x4. From the moment the game began, the Rams were significantly better. Vikings had the better regular season. Is Kevin O'Connell not a good coach? He put up 9 points in that game. Is he not a good offensive coordinator? Does he not have a feel for it? Or alternatively, is this how football goes sometimes? It is. Now, as for a theme in Oregon's exploitable defense at times, I think the biggest area where the personnel can be upgraded is at the safety spot. I 100% believe that. I was watching Ohio State play against Texas, and that was the biggest thing that stood out. Heck, I watched Notre Dame this year, and you'll see them in the national championship game. And the number one thing that stands out that I feel like Oregon is missing is the elite safety play. But I don't feel like the linebackers are at a significant disadvantage. I don't think there's a huge gap in defensive line talent. And I think Oregon's corners were actually pretty darn good this year. When you look at the way Ohio State moved the ball down the field, they weren't picking on the corners who were not getting beat when they did throw the ball that way. They weren't getting burned. They weren't getting absolutely worked or having coverage busts. I thought Nico Reed and Jabbar Muhammad were good this year. Sure, they could be great. They weren't Christian Gonzalez level. So yeah, you can take another step forward there. But the one area was the weakness that I saw going into the Rose Bowl and that Ohio State took advantage of. Yeah, the safeties have to be better, but guess what? The coaches have to be better. I mean, something about why was there a blown coverage on Jeremiah Smith? How does that ever happen? Texas came out and had a brilliant game plan where they were bracketing, doubling him the whole game, and it threw Ohio State off of their rhythm. Those are the sorts of things. Maybe Oregon didn't feel like that was the right approach. Maybe they trusted their guys too much in coverage. Maybe they didn't feel like their guys could execute that game plan. I don't know. We're never going to know that answer. But what we do know, based on watching the other teams in college football who have played Ohio State and played them tough, the Michigan game is just a disastrous coaching effort. Again, great example. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, great coaches, really good, horrible day against Michigan. Horrible day. That would be our lasting impression of Ohio State if the playoff hadn't expanded this year. So I don't think that the coaching staff needs to make huge changes. They do need to consistently be in improvement mode. And that's what I've seen from them over the last couple of years. Yes, some personnel can be better, but sometimes you just got to look at the coaches and say they need to be better. And you do a little bit of both, and you can get better outcomes on the field.